So, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is that you're watching this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lori Krajewski. I am a holistic advocate, coach. I've been doing this for so long, way before the whole coach thing ever became a coach. I don't really know what to call myself, but I am very holistic, uh, traditional medicine minded. And I started this podcast to invite people to come and talk about the gifts that they offer and the healing techniques or tools or experience or education that they use in their work. And I like to do this really blind. I like to just sit down, meet somebody for coffee, and listen. And why not just record them so everybody else can learn what I learn? So today, this is one of those blind interviews. Sarah and I do not know each other. We haven't really even talked before this interview. So this is like my favorite thing. This is how I love to do this. So Sarah, thank you so much for blind interview coffee conversation with me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's the best.
So I will just tell everybody a little bit about you, and I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you can take it and run with it.
Great.
All right. So Sarah Rollins is a licensed clinical social worker and somatic experiencing practitioner in Michigan. She is the owner of one of the therapists at Embodied Wellness, PLLC, a virtual psychotherapy practice that specializes in trauma, anxiety, and depression for adolescents and adults. Sarah specifically works with individuals with developmental trauma and complex trauma. In addition to somatic experiencing, she also integrates eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is known as EMDR, internal family systems, and attachment lens in therapy. I am vaguely familiar with EMDR, having worked at a psychiatric hospital for many years, working with psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. What I am not sure about is internal family systems and attachment lens. Tell
Yeah.
me all the things, Sarah.
Okay. Yeah. So, internal family systems is a therapy that was developed by Dick Schwartz. The basic premise is that we all have parts. Um, so, and no parts are bad. All parts are good. The way I think about it is that, I have a part of me right now that is so loving that I'm here, right? I'm so excited. I'm so loving that I'm here. I also have a part of me that it's like, it's Friday. I want to be sleeping in and, right? Like, or on the beach or, right? So I also have a part of me that like there's stressors going on and I'm focusing on the stressors. So we all have different parts of ourselves. And there's the way they categorize it is there's manager parts that are really focusing on getting things done, right? Like I have to manage the situation. And then there's firefighter parts that kind of come in and think about a firefighter, like they take out all the problems, right? And so common firefighter parts might be using substances, maybe eating disordered behaviors, self-harm, things that make us feel better in the moment.
Yeah.
But maybe
not
have a
really
long
term.
right. And then we have these exile parts that maybe we're ashamed of. And so we literally exile them. And we might consciously or unconsciously exile these parts. And so part of what we do in IFS is we work to understand and befriend all these parts and work to understand what the exiles are, because a lot of times we don't know what the exiles are, and see if we can bring the exiles back into the picture, and also get to know self, because we all have a core self and there's a lot of different philosophies around self, different different modalities have different words around self. So I think that's cool. But and self is not a part. So self is core. And so what we want to do is view all these parts from self. So I know that's a very overbroad view of IFS, but I think when I use IFS with people, a lot of people can relate because we all have parts, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I used to work with a woman. Well, I still work with her at times, but I used to work with women who used to describe it very similarly. There's our inherent self, who we genuinely are at our core, and then we have all these characters. So it's a very similar way of describing it. Like you said, there's probably hundreds of ways to describe what makes us who we are, right? I am also no stranger to trauma. So feel free to expand on that as much as you would like. I think in the last 3 years, everyone can relate to some kind of trauma, just being separated and isolated. And sometimes people have had to leave their jobs in the last few years, or they were downsized, or businesses just had to close their doors. There's probably another 100 different ways we could look at trauma in the last few years. Excuse me, let alone other things that can happen in our lives, such as the loss of a loved one, or a major accident, or moving across country. It can be very traumatic. There's so many different types of trauma, and I don't think people realize that can actually leave an injury in the brain. Is that where EMDR comes in?
Yeah, so this is where all these modalities come in, and that's a lot of what I do. Somatic Experiencing, EMDR, IFS, attachment focused therapy, or taking an attachment lens to therapy. So I like, if it's okay, I like to go back to even defining trauma, because what I notice a lot in my work is that people, understandably, one, don't know what trauma is, or minimize their experiences as trauma. And I will say there's a lot of definitions of trauma. One definition is an experience is that it's too much, too fast, too soon, or not enough for the nervous system, right? Because that could be neglect, not enough. Another definition of trauma is a lack of relationship. Another definition of trauma is trauma is not in the event, it's in the nervous system.
Yeah.
And I like that one because I think a lot of our society focuses on the event.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then we get stuck in, okay, well, maybe we both had the same event happen.
Yes.
But why did one person have these, quote, trauma responses or whatever, and someone else didn't? And then we start to blame ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's wrong with me that I had nightmares, flashbacks, I avoid this experience, but the other person that was in that same event as me didn't.
Right.
And then, so then, yeah, there's a lot of shame, like, what's wrong with me?
Yes. I think that's really key. I love that you shared that, because it's, the event that really changed the course of my life wasn't a shared family event. We lost a loved one in our family. So every single one of us lost the exact same person, and every single one of us reacted, similarly, right? It's going to be a similar experience, but every single one of us has our own nervous system. We have our own issues that we bring to the table. So we all have our own response. I love this. See, this is why I do these conversations. I love this stuff.
Yeah. And me too. Right. And I think a lot of it is shame. Right. And Brene Brown, one of the loves that I have, is she always says there's enough empathy to go around. And I love that, because I think a lot of us shame ourselves, like, well, I didn't go through a genocide, or there's someone who has a worse trauma than me. And
so don't you feel like that's the way that we kind of gaslight ourselves?
Yes, 100%.
We've been taught to minimize, So then when these things happen to us, we minimize and we dismiss.
Exactly.
And people, a lot of times people will call it like spiritual bypassing. We just
Yes.
bypass the feelings because we shouldn't be feeling that way. Well, you can't help how you feel. If you don't have tools in your toolbox to navigate these emotions and navigate the things that come up in your life, they get stuck.
Exactly. And Peter Levine, who developed somatic experiencing, part of why he developed it was he studied animals. And he said his hypothesis was, why do animals let go of trauma, the trauma responses, and humans have a harder time? And one of the reasons is because just that, right, is that we actually thwart our trauma responses because of those things. And so part of the work I do is there's an acronym that we use in somatic experiencing. It's called SIBAM. S is for sensation, I is for imagery, B is for behavior, A is for affect, and M is for meaning making, not meaning, meaning making. And what I notice is that as humans, and we all have all these aspects, and we want to have right relationship with all these aspects. And what I notice a lot is that we have too much relationship with meaning making.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have
And
a
so
lot
it's
of
not
ideas, don't we?
right. And we jump to conclusions so quickly.
Yes.
Right. So
And don't you feel
yeah.
like a lot of it is the ideas that we create around these experiences are the problem?
Right. And then they prevent us from releasing the trauma
The
response
trauma
that's
itself,
stuck in
yeah.
our body.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit to this experiment that he did with animals. And I read this many years ago, so correct me if I don't get it right, but when an animal experiences trauma, when they go to a safe place, they like shut down a little bit and they like reset their nervous system. Is that right? Before they proceed with their day and they proceed with, finding food and doing all of the things.
Yeah, exactly. So once an animal is safe, and you hit the nail on the head, right? Is they have to be safe, because if we're not safe, humans are animals too, right?
Right.
So if an animal's not safe, they're still going to be in a trauma response, as
Right.
they should be.
Yes, that's the whole point of fight and flight, right? That's the whole
Right.
point, is to keep us safe.
Right. So what a lot of the things that I do is help educate people that the self-protection responses, like you said, fighting, flighting, freezing, right? Even orienting,
Yeah.
are self-protection responses that we want to have. A lot of people, including myself, sometimes get really frustrated, like, well, why did I freeze? Or why did I run? And I'm like, I'm so glad you ran.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you didn't, like, I think about a bear, right? I'm so glad you didn't just like approach the bear and say like, hey bear, how you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're right. So an animal, once it's safe, for example, will then shake off
The adrenaline.
the excess fight or the excess freeze. And there's actually videos you can YouTube like Peter Levine. I think there's like a polar bear video where you watch it literally like shake off that excess energy.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of take a time out, right? To recuperate from the experience they just had. They fully feel it. It's a visceral response and they fully feel it. But what's interesting about animals is they don't have all of these ideas in the way.
Yeah.
They don't have all of these words in the way, and they don't have all of this conditioning in the way of, stop your crying or I'll give you something to cry about. All of these conditions that humans put on us and we put on each other to move through these traumatic experiences. I mean, if I just about get hit by a car, I'm going to have an experience about that. And if I blow that off, what happens? What happens when we gaslight ourselves? What happens when we blow it off and we get over it? What happens?
Right. Right. It's this mind over matter, right? Yeah.
I can tell you what happens. It gets really messy.
Right. Right. Well, a couple things happen, right? So we have what's called thwarted self-protection responses. So a self-protection response can be orienting. So orienting, a lot of people don't know what orienting is, and I didn't either. So
Go for it.
orienting is the example I give is when we're driving in a car. And I know some people are in cities that they don't drive, but I am. So that's a good example for me. But so if we're driving in a car or we're walking around and we hear a siren, and an orienting response is we move our heads in order to find that siren. So, or I think of a squirrel, right? So a squirrel is like defense, is their head is moving to find danger. So we have exploratory orienting, which we're just kind of like noticing what's around us. And then we have defensive orienting, where it's like we hear that siren and it's like, where is that danger? Like I have to look out. Or if you hear a big crash,
Right.
you're immediately going to look.
Right. Right.
So a lot of people, that's part of, it's a little different, but it kind of goes along with the startle response. A little bit different. I'm not going to go into all that, but there is, but we know the startle. So some people come to me and say like, oh, I get startled really quick, easily.
Yeah.
So that's part of that. And then we have thwarted fight. So I get angry all the time, like no matter what, just everything makes me angry or irritated or frustrated, kind of that realm. Then we have the thwarted flight. So it could be that I just want to get away all the time, right? It could be that like I have this urge to run, this urge to flee. It could be that like I can't be in relationship with people because all I want to do is leave.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's freeze, right? And so a lot of people are actually in what we call functional freeze, where it's not that they're actually frozen, just standing there, never moving, but truly, maybe they're dissociated or they're moving around the world and their body's there, but their minds aren't. And so in our world, we might see that as depression, or we might see that as lethargy. We might see that as sleeping a lot. We might see that as more shut down. So, so these are the ways that trauma can get, as we say, stuck in our bodies. And we know logically, this is where the logic gets stuck, right? We can say logically, it's not my fault, or logically, X, Y, and Z. But that's why people come to me. It's like, logically, I know it's not my fault, but I just want to run all the time. And so that's where we do some somatic work or EMDR or whatever it is. Yeah.
So without giving away too much information, what exactly is this somatic experience work? And you can use me as an example if you want, or however, I don't want you to give away all the trade secrets or, give away all of the juicy bits, but to just kind of give people an idea of what this work is or how they might benefit.
Yeah, great question. So trying to think of how I want to do this.
Well, so for example, when
yeah.
you're just explaining those three, those three steps, or not steps, but you're just describing those three different ways that we can feel, right? Well, at any course in time, I've felt all three of those, right? Because I was very young when I experienced this loss, and I didn't have any tools to handle that. I don't know. I had no clue how to handle the loss of a loved one. It just stuff it in a drawer somewhere or deny how you feel and get over it. Well, you don't. And
Right.
that kind of wreaked havoc with my psyche for a long time. I was a very angry young woman. I was probably dissociated for a few years, all of those things. So just kind of using that as an example, how would I, for example, how would I start working with you? What would we do? What does that look like?
Yeah, awesome. Oh, I love it. Okay. So if you're willing,
I'm completely willing. I just don't want you to give away all of the secret details.
no, 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 no,
Okay.
no. Would you be willing to do a little somatic work with me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And what do you notice inside as you say yes to doing some somatic work with me?
I'm thrilled because I am addicted to healing.
Yeah.
The wound never quite heals. When we
Mm.
have, and I shouldn't say unilaterally across the board for everybody, but when we lose a loved one, it's not something you get over. And that was the mistake that I made for many years. I kept trying to get over. If somebody would have just tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're never going to get over it, honey. You just got to get through it," I would have probably been a lot better off.
Yeah.
So, because she was such a significant person to me, she really was the love of my life. It was my sister, and
Okay.
I loved her dearly. She was my oxygen, So when she
Yeah.
passed, I kind of wanted to too,
Yeah.
and that's not something that you ever really get over. So when
No.
I have an opportunity to heal that, I'm like, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is it okay if I just point something out for you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I noticed this like movement in your body of when you said let's do it, your fist kind of clenched, you move forward in this kind of like forward movement.
Okay.
Yeah. What is it like for me to name that for you?
Uh, I don't know. To me, that says forward movement. I'm ready to go. I'm ready
Yeah.
to move forward.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Okay. So, one of the first things that I do with people is I set the initial conditions. And what that means is, in order to do any trauma work, you hit the nail on the head earlier. We have to be, and I always say relatively safe. And the reason I say relatively safe is because we don't always have the privilege to be fully safe.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, what I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to do this too, if you're willing, and I always say if you're willing, it's choice. Can you make yourself 1% more comfortable?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sure can.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
I did it too. Yeah. And what do you notice inside in your body as you make yourself 1% more comfortable?
There's a little more calm
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a place that you notice that calm?
in my core.
Yeah. Yeah. And I noticed there was a big exhale kind of
Yeah.
as you did that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And if you're willing, is using your eyes and maybe using your ears or other senses, can you look around your space and notice your space and tell me if there's cues that tell you that you're relatively or actually safe where you are?
Well, it was interesting when you said how we can be relatively safe. We can't always necessarily be 100%, but the space that I am in is a cocoon. It's
Ah,
extremely loving and comfortable and warm. Yeah.
ah, yeah, yeah. And is there something that tells you that? Like, what are the cues that tell you it's loving and warm and
Color,
comfortable?
texture,
Yeah.
um, elements.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So from here, I'm wondering if you could give me just um, we call this oh my gosh, I'm blanking here. We call this the headline. Okay. So if you could give me a headline So if like there was a newspaper article, if you could give me a headline of the event, right? And I know you did tell me a little bit about it already, but if you could just give me a headline of the event, and then we'll pause if that's okay with you.
A headline of the event that took place.
Yep. Yeah, about your sister.
Boy, I'm not even really sure how to phrase that. In a headline form, my brain's kind of like, what?
Yeah.
I believe the headline actually read, local resident dies in car accident.
Mm,
Something to that effect. So
yeah. Yeah. And what happens is you name that, like local resident dies in car accident.
it just, it brings you back to that moment when you learn of the accident, when her fiance called and, hey, get your mom on the phone, and it's not good. It brings you back to that moment of the horrible accident and what she went through.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it okay if I point something out?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that it brings you back and you use the word you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it okay to restate that and say it brings me back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And taking all the time you need.
Yeah, it did bring me right back to that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it brings you back, was that like an image or was that a sensation?
Both.
Yeah.
I'm very empathic, so I feel everything. But
Yeah.
it was in the middle of the night, right? So
Mm.
excuse me, I was the one who heard the phone ringing, so I was the one who answered, and that alone triggered a response in my body for many, many years. You talk about the startle response. For many years, I couldn't get woken up in the middle of the night, or I'd have a panic attack.
Yeah.
And just thinking of, because she didn't pass away right away. It took them 45 minutes to get her out of the car.
Wow.
She did recover from surgery for a minute. So, it brings me back emotionally and mentally and visually to that moment of, that heinous 24, 36-hour period. I
Wow.
absolutely dissociated when we got to the hospital. I absolutely dissociated. My
Right.
I remember sitting in the chair, but I was up in the corner of the room looking down at the room. That's how far I dissociated from that experience. It was
Mm.
nothing I've ever experienced before, and it freaked me all the way out. I thought I lost my mind, and in a way I did.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. And
Right.
I just left my body.
Yeah. Yeah. And how protective that was.
I had no idea. We always go to the negative. Oh my gosh, I
Hmm.
lost my mind. I lost my mind. I can't tell anybody I lost my mind.
Right.
I lost my mind. But here you are saying, hallelujah, you protected
See,
yourself.
right.
Yeah, it was intense. And keep in mind, I was 13. I
Right. You're
had
a baby.
zero tools to handle stress.
Right. But actually, you did have tools.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
body
There
had
you go.
tools.
There you go.
Mm.
Yes, I did have a tool.
Yeah. And how
Yeah.
cool that your body did that like automatically.
Well, I love that we're having this conversation. I've never thought
Yeah.
of it that way.
Yeah. Like how cool that your body just said, hey, I'm doing this. I'm protecting you because I love you.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's
So
some of the
that's the
magic.
somatic experience. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I can see how a full session would be. Like, I want to schedule a full session now. Let's keep going with this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of it is understanding, right? Like maybe the nervous system, like a lot of us believe that our nervous systems are broken because of like what they did. And maybe it's not about our nervous systems being broken. Maybe it's about our nervous systems doing exactly what they're meant to do.
Maybe it's being fully intact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I love this. I can't even tell you how much I love this. I'm so glad we're
Yeah.
talking about this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when does EMDR come into play? I know people might have heard of these terms, and it's usually associated with vets, right? Veterans
Yep.
who have had such horrible traumatic responses that they essentially can't function. But it's used in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. So PTSD started with vets. And then we realized, like, oh, not just veterans can have post traumatic stress disorder. So EMDR can be used with a lot of different symptoms. What I notice is that people who benefit most from EMDR, one, need to be embodied. And so what I mean by embodied is really be in touch with their sensations. So we always screen for dissociation with EMDR because dissociation is an extreme form of disembodiment. Um, and there's a spectrum of dissociation, right? We can dissociate by daydreaming, that we all do, and there's nothing wrong with daydreaming, to the more extreme of, having, multiple personality disorders, dissociative identity disorder, kind of that extreme. So, but the thing is that I notice when I do somatic work with somebody, and then go into EMDR, it's more effective than going straight into EMDR.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so usually what I do EMDR around is more of a specific memory that feels stuck.
Mm.
Less about like where somatic work is more around a body memory, or like thwarted self-protection responses, like noticing like I always go into freeze, or I always go into, fight or flight, right? Or I notice I go into all three, right? And that's common too. Like it might not just be one. And that
Right.
is very common. So I would say, like, for example, if, okay, I have a memory and it's that the memory is really sticky, that's really good for EMDR. For somatic work is what's living in my body and feeling safe in my body. So I think both are really helpful, just in different ways. And they're
Right.
very complementary, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree. I can see where you might use one for a few sessions and then transition into, let's really target this one specific thing. And I agree, it isn't, with all due respect to veterans and the awful experiences that I know that they have had, it isn't just vets, right? It's anybody who has had a traumatic experience that got stuck and is messing with
Right,
their psyche and is messing with their life.
right,
It,
right.
it can be really debilitating. And
Yeah.
I guess going back to my work a little bit, is I always encourage people to not look at it as mental health and then physical health. That there's no cutoff point.
Yes, yes.
Right here starts mental health and right here starts physical. That's not how it works. We
Right.
have to look at the whole body: mind, spirit, emotion, physical. And when one of those components is off, your whole life can be off. It's,
Yeah.
if you have trauma, if you have, like you said, multiple personalities, if you've got anxiety, if you've got depression, if you've got any of these mental health issues, you've got spiritual issues, you've got emotional issues, and you've got physical issues. It's all one package. And that's really what I try to encourage people. Everybody wants to, it's okay if you're not okay. No, it's not. No, it's not. Now you're going to say, well, if it's okay if you have cancer, it's okay if you have Lyme, it's okay
Yeah.
if you have MS. No, it's not. There's
Mm,
something wrong. And there's things that we can do, maybe not to eradicate it, maybe not to ever be free of Lyme or ever be free of MS, but there are things that we can do to support our body through MS, to support our body through Lyme, to support our body through anxiety, to support reintegration of the mind. And I just encourage people so strongly to, everybody wants to end the stigma. Well, here's ending the stigma. Being a human is tough. Have some grace
yeah.
with yourself, have some compassion for yourself. And I so love that we are having this conversation, because just that one tool that you just gave me to help me understand that, no, I didn't lose my mind. My nervous system did exactly what it was designed to do. That is amazing. Learn more about what our minds can do to protect us. It might look cray
Right.
cray.
Yes. Yes.
It might look absolutely crazy, but in
Right.
truth, that was what I needed in that moment. And my nervous system knew it.
Yes.
That's brilliant to me. And if,
Yeah.
if people can start to hear this kind of stuff and start to really understand how the nervous system works, and how, I mean, understanding how our brains work, my gosh, it's probably going to take another 100 years to really, really understand. I am fascinated by the brain. I don't know about you, but I am
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
fascinated by the brain. And boy, I should have been a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
Because it is such a fascinating, multifunctional, multidimensional part of being a human.
Yeah.
And we talked about animals before, right? And how simple their mind is, but how effective it is for them and for their lives, and how they have such a very simple but really profound way of protecting themselves. And imagine if all of these thoughts that we have, what a
Yeah.
hindrance that can be to overcoming that fight or flight, to overcoming those traumatic experiences, to overcoming all of the things that we go through. It's so complex.
It really is. It really is.
I know I just
Yeah.
spiraled out there a little bit as I was thinking aloud, but
Um,
it's so complex, so beautifully complex.
yeah. And that's why we do it in relationship, because a lot of trauma happens
Yeah.
because of a breach of relationship. And that kind of goes back to attachment lens. Not all trauma, of course, but a lot of trauma. And so part of this work is doing it in relationship, in safe, trusting relationship. And it doesn't have to be with a therapist. But part of it is that we don't need to do it alone.
Yeah.
And right. And a lot of the belief that we have when we've had traumatic experiences within relationship is that I have to do this alone because relationship has been traumatic,
Mhm.
right? I don't know a love without abuse. And so there's that, like, we call it coupling in somatic work, but there's that linkage. And so part of the work is truly just being in relationship with another person can be healing. And that's part of why COVID could, for a lot of people, was so traumatic, was there was a loss of relationship,
Yeah.
kind of as you brought up at the beginning.
And for some people, loss of a lot of relationships.
Oh,
Your
yeah.
perhaps relationships at home, relationships in family, but also relationships at work.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, as much
Yeah,
as I love being able to connect with people this way, it's still different.
it is. Yeah.
I mean, dogs thrive in packs for a reason. So do
Hmm.
humans. We are
Yeah.
not meant to be separated, and
Right.
nobody intended for us to do this life alone. There's
Right.
no shame in needing that physical connection. There is no shame in reaching out to somebody like you or anybody else in your practice for guidance.
Yeah.
There's no shame in this. Please, people, if you are struggling and you resonate with Sarah, please reach out to her. I am absolutely going to give her contact information for you to be able to do that. She's shared her email with me, so you can reach out to her. If you have questions, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah.
Within reason. We can't give medical advice. We can't, diagnose and treat and all of that good stuff. But I am fascinated, and honestly, I would love to continue this conversation another time. If that's something that you're
Definitely.
interested, you let me know and
Would
we'll do a
love
part
to.
2.
Yes, please. Part 2, 3, 4. Yes.
Let's do it. Seriously,
Yeah.
I would love to do a series on, I mean, like I said, the mind fascinates me, and I could talk about this for days. So if I
Yes.
have a willing victim who's going to talk about it with me,
I would call myself willing, not a victim, but willing.
I'm teasing.
I know, I know.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you are up for doing some more talks, I would love to share more information with people. There's a lot of what you do that we haven't even touched on yet. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's do this again.
I'm
But for
I'm
now,
so down. Yeah.
let's just say there is no stigma. There is no shame. We are all meant to do this together. We are all here to support one another. So just reach out and let's start the healing. What would you have to say to anybody watching who might need a little something? How would you want to close this out? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
Yeah. Yeah. I would say the nervous system has one goal, and the goal is survival. And I know that our minds focus on what's cool and what our loved ones say and what society says, but our nervous system cares about one thing. And like I said, that's survival. And so if you're alive, that's all that matters to the nervous system. And so I know a lot of times we say, but I didn't do anything, right? Or I didn't do the right thing. But if you're here, you did do the right thing, at least to the nervous system.
okay.
And so I think that's super important because the mind will, like we talked about, will gaslight us into believing that we maybe did the wrong thing. But like I said, all it cares about is survival.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's really poignant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I'd kind of like to pick up there next time we talk.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course.
If you are watching this and you want to reach out to Sarah, like I said, I'll leave her information attached to this recording. If you have some kind of healing modality, if you have something to offer and you would like to interview with me, please reach out to me. I would love to have a conversation with you and meet you for coffee. So thank you for joining us, and may you be blessed. Bye for now.